Welcome back to the Chiro Money Show, where we help chiropractors make better financial decisions so they can build stability with their finances and a lifestyle they love. We're your hosts, Chris Shield and Scott Campbell with Align Wealth. Welcome back.
Welcome in. What are we talking about today? Do you have any updates first?
We can do updates. Do we have updates?
What do you have to share?
Nothing.
Nothing going on?
I have no updates right now.
No updates right now? I think I only have one. There's no Tamagotchi joining the episode today.
That's good.
Yeah.
Did you outsource the management of the Tamagotchi?
It's been lost.
It's
Got
dead.
lost.
No.
We don't know where Tamagotchi went, so no longer my responsibility.
Well, that's one way to deal with it.
Yeah. Yep. Sorry to our listeners. We have no major updates to you. We can just dive into the show today, hit our topic.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's why they're here anyway.
That's why they're here, of course. Yeah. So we got some spicy, controversial topics in personal finance. We have 4 or 5. We'll see how many we hit on in the conversation today. We won't go too long, but there's a lot of topics out there. It's not limited to these 5. There's probably dozens of different topics out there in the personal finance space that are heavily debated, and you can see it from both sides. We're going to hit a few of them today that we think were interesting and could share some perspective on. So let's get right into it. What's the first one we got?
Yeah. Well, before we do that, I just there's so many different variables with all these topics, and there's the math and what the math says. There's the human and emotional component. Ultimately, it seems like these topics are so controversial because ultimately a lot of people place their identity in being something that's defined by one of these topics. So for the first one, for instance, renting versus owning, right? A lot of people identify themselves as a homeowner, and that's a prideful thing. And it's almost looked down upon if you rent in a lot of societies, although not in all. So yeah, I think that identity piece is part of the reason that these things become such heated debates. You can find some pretty spicy conversations about this stuff online if you want to.
For sure. And even aside from the identity side of things, you're totally right. Most of these are tied to our identity. But when it comes to this first one of renting versus owning, I think it also goes back to what our culture and society says is the thing that you should or ought to be doing when it comes to the decision on, do you rent or do you buy? We all need a place to live. So are you going to rent it or are you going to buy it? And a lot of us are told growing up that, you shouldn't be renting. It's just a waste of money. You need to get into a property that you own as soon as possible. Right.
Yeah. It's kind of been taught to us as common sense, logic, don't rent. So yeah, a lot of people, let's focus on the buy side. If we're talking about buying a house or property to live in, and we're not talking about renting, or buying an investment property at this point. Let's just talk about your primary residence. Like you said, we all need a place to live. So what's the arguments for buying a place versus renting? One that I hear often is you're building equity if you own the place. And if you're renting it, you've got nothing to show for that. Your rent payments are going out the window.
Yep. You're paying someone else's mortgage down.
Totally. People love using that one.
Yeah.
But the point I like to think about or encourage people to think about on that is yes, you are building some equity, but the reality is, especially early on in the mortgage, far less than half of your total mortgage payment is actually going towards equity. More than half of it is going towards interest in the beginning.
Sure.
So that equity you're building is actually quite a bit smaller than you think.
So from a buying standpoint, why would you first consider, if you were to think about this from a big picture perspective, why do you want to consider buying in the first place? Why should someone consider buying versus opting to rent?
Yeah, you want stability. You want predictable housing. You want somewhere you can customize, that you can make modifications to, and ultimately have a standard of living that you can control in a location that you want without hopefully being forced to make changes.
For sure. There's some, you think when it comes to the renting side of things, you could potentially get, forced out of your place. You get not necessarily evicted, but if the individual who owns the property, if they say, I'm going to sell the property now, and they're forced to move out and find a new place to live, that can be uncomfortable disturbing to your life and where you live and the job that you're at. Another one that comes to mind for myself personally, and comes down to like if you have children in particular and you want your children to go to a certain school and be in a neighborhood and be established there, like there's some good reason from that standpoint of buying a house so that you can build stability in not only your life but your children's life. If you want them to kind of go to the same school, last thing you need is to be potentially, I mean, you might be in a neighborhood, for example, that doesn't have a whole lot of rental options. I know the neighborhood I'm in, there's not a whole lot of homes here, I think, that are available for rent. We got kicked out of our home if we were renting it, and we really at the school that we're going to, that might be, just an argument for why you'd want to buy versus being in a situation to rent.
Yeah, for sure. Lots of personal reasons and choices, which I do think are all valid and yeah, all reasonable to consider. But those are so personal in nature that it's hard. Like those aren't often the ones that are argued. Like when you look at like pros and cons or like buy versus rent, right? It goes back to like the common things that are common to all of us. So back to like arguments for buying, another one that we often hear is like it's a forced savings plan. So like if you couldn't save money otherwise, at least you're building equity and saving through paying your mortgage. So that's a pretty common one, right? But I hate that one. Like I think if you can't save money, buying a house is probably not the right thing to do, right? Like sure, I get the logic that it is some forced savings, but if that's your reality that like you can't save money regularly in your kind of monthly cash flow, probably not in a great position to buy a house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, buying a house for the reason being that it's going to be an ability to, or a way to force yourself to growing your net worth. You hear the argument sometimes like, oh, my biggest asset is my home. Like, look at how well my house is appreciated over a long period of time. And generally speaking, that goes back to like, well, you need a place to live. You've never probably been in a situation where you've been forced to sell. And since you've had to kind of potentially been in a situation where you're forced to hold that for 20 or 30 years, maybe even longer, that no wonder it might not have generated the best return on your investment over the long run compared to other options for investing. But because the fact that you held it for 30 years, it looks pretty good.
Yeah. And the other big part that's often forgotten, that like looking at the historical returns or like your actual ROI on your house purchase and resale, is a lot of people are negating the impact of leverage in that position. And so when you buy a $500,000 house and you put $100,000 down, like you have $400,000 of leverage in there. So your increase of maybe 5% or 6% on the price value, which is kind of historically what it averaged or is common to average in Canada. It's like that 5% is not on your 100,000 you have invested. It's actually on the $500,000 value. And that is often such a positive, but it can also be very detrimental when property values, they don't have to drop much for people to be underwater, because we can have down payments as low as 5% in Canada. If you have 5% down and 5% equity, your house value goes down 5%. Your maybe 50 or 60,000 that you put down is now gone. It's evaporated if you have to sell.
Speaking of down payments, you see that quite commonly too. You've been told by society, maybe your parents or whomever, that you need to be buying as soon as possible, that you do whatever you can to scrape up that 5% down payment, because that's the entry point of at least getting the ability to maybe buy your first home. But then you have to pay the additional CMHC insurance on top of your 5%. And that's where you're potentially in a situation right away where what you owe on the mortgage plus the CMHC insurance is more than what the value of the house is. So you're underwater on day one.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be a tough situation for sure.
Yeah. Not to say that you shouldn't do that, but there could, once we get into the why there might be some benefits to renting, there could be a lot of reasons to say maybe it makes more sense to rent, which we'll get into these reasons why renting is not as bad as what people make it out to be, to say I'm going to stay a renter until I can save up maybe 15 or 20% and get into the house and have some more, definitely some breathing room on the equity side if with property values going up and down.
For sure. The other thing before we get into rents to point out is like, yeah, if you save up 5% and put 5% down and have no other savings, like that's not a great position to start off your homeowner journey because we know there are other hidden homeownership costs or potential things that can come up, like replacing a furnace, replacing a hot water tank, a roof, something breaks, that, a dishwasher, whatever the case is, right? Like those are your responsibilities as a homeowner. Now, as a renter, you don't have to worry about those hidden ownership costs that sometimes creep up, right?
Yep.
So property taxes, maintenance, insurance, those things are not part of your concern as a renter. And then on the flip side, though, some people might argue like beyond just like the general maintenance, maybe if you are doing some investment into your house, that's actually increasing the value in the house. And that is also a fair argument in some cases too, right?
For sure. And when I think about homeowners, they often forget about those key points that you just brought up: home maintenance costs, property taxes, all that over insurance, all that over the course of a long period of time. They usually forget about those additional costs that they're paying out when they think about what their return on their investment has been. They ignore that the fact that they had to put, a new roof on that cost $20,000 and they had to re-insulate the ceiling for another couple grand 2 years ago. Like they forget about those costs of home ownership that does play a toll on what your actual return on your investment is. Again, when we go back to big picture, we need to think about your home should be a place to live, not necessarily you're buying it for the purpose of it being an investment. Would you agree with that?
100% agree. 100% agree. I always say that if your principal residence is a good investment, that's a bonus, but that should not be even in your top 3 reasons for purchasing a house as a primary residence.
Let's talk about the rent side. Tell us why, let's think about the spreadsheet standpoint. Like if you are a renter, how could you make the case for renting appealing from a, not wasting money standpoint?
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy.
Why is it not a waste of money?
I think it's pretty easy. In most environments in Canada right now, I would say that renting is, just from a dollars perspective, it is cheaper to rent than own a comparable property. And it's mostly for those reasons of, the additional insurance, property taxes, maintenance, things like that. So your monthly cost for housing is less. So if you take that savings and invest that, you can actually end up further ahead than owning the comparable property. However, it's often argued, nobody's actually going to do that. Like, do people actually invest the difference if they save money on renting the same house versus buying it? And that's where, we can say theoretically, like you could do that and you should do that. But in reality, is that happening? Well, that's where, people need that discipline and the structure and systems to actually do that. So it's probably not as common as we think or would like to see it, but it's possible.
Yep. I think the main takeaway point here is like, I don't think renting should be looked down upon to say you can't build wealth as a renter. It would just take some good planning and thoughtfulness to say there is a difference in cost between renting and owning a home for the points that we've mentioned. And if you're going to be intentional about your planning to say, I want to wait till I can save up to 20% down payment or whatever the case is, or I'm comfortable being a renter. I like the flexibility of renting and not being forced down to one place or being, all the reasons why someone may want to be a renter, but you say, hey, I want to build my wealth the same way as a homeowner could. That's where it comes down to taking that difference and being thoughtful of actually going in and getting that invested. And then if you were to take that journey, that's where the long-term projections of homeownership versus renting could look very similar at the end of the day from a wealth generation standpoint.
Yeah, totally. I would encourage anybody that's thinking about this scenario for themselves. At the end of the day, if the outcome is the same from a financial perspective, which option is going to allow you to live the life that you want? Do you value that flexibility? Do you want to be able to relocate for an opportunity, for a job, for your family, whatever? Do you want that, less stress of home ownership? So bottom line, it's your choice. Both are good options. Do what works for you, not what society tells you to do.
Hey, before we keep going, if you've been listening and thinking, I could really use some clarity around where I truly stand with my finances, we've got you covered. Take our free financial clarity assessment. It only takes about 5 minutes, and you'll get a personalized scorecard showing exactly where you're strong, where you might be spinning your wheels a little bit, and where to focus next. you can head over to alignwealth.ca or just hit the link in the show notes. All right, cool. Back to the show. All right, topic number 2. What do we got, Chris?
All right, next topic, dividend investing. Wow, this is a fun one.
This is spicy for sure.
Yeah. I mean, this is probably one of the most popular investment related topics on Reddit. Over 700,000 community members. People get fired up about receiving monthly or quarterly dividends from their investments.
The amount of influencers I see on social media, Instagram, TikTok, you name it, doesn't matter where, like pounding the drum for why you need to be investing into dividend stocks and building a dividend portfolio and making it like a key component of building wealth, regardless of your age, whether you're 65 in retirement or you're a 30-year-old starting your investment journey. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, it's, they're committed to that investment philosophy.
Yeah. And they think it works for everyone and that everyone should do it, which I think that's the key point here is like, there are so many good fundamental lessons or like applications to dividend investing that can result in positive outcomes, but you can get to the same result in a different way. It doesn't have to be through dividends, right?
Before we keep diving down into this, I love it. We're going to get to some good stuff here. Chris, tell us what does it mean to be a dividend investor? Why would you what does that philosophy mean? What's a dividend? Why are they appealed to that type of strategy?
So yeah, to break it down, a dividend is essentially a payment from a company you're invested in, and it flows through to you directly as the investor. And this, depending on the investment, can happen on a monthly or a quarterly or annual basis, even in some cases. And essentially, like if we think of an analogy, we can think of an apple. Like if you have an apple and that's your property that you own, and then you take a slice of that apple and you separate that would be like the dividend that you receive. You still only have one apple. You have an apple with a slice out of it, and you have the slice separately.
That's right.
It's still just one apple. Same thing with a dividend. You own 100 shares of a corporation. They pay out a dividend. If your 100 shares are worth $1,000 and you got paid out $10 in dividend, what's going to happen is your shares are now worth $990 and you've been paid a $10 dividend. So your total value that you have is still $1,000. So you're not gaining anything, but you're being given your profits on a regular basis. They're being distributed to you.
So a dividend investor typically will say things like, well, I get cash on a regular basis without selling any of my stocks. Or it's basically free money. Get paid while you wait to grow your wealth. Like, from my perspective, I view a lot of dividend investors viewing it in the sense of that apple analogy is that they just got a slice of apple, but they still have a full apple. Like they think they have an apple plus a slice. That's their way they're thinking about the process of like, it's basically free money. I get paid, my stocks keep going up in value, but it's not actually how it works from in terms of like what that company, how that the company grows its profit and what that's worth, that what the share value is worth of that company. It's just basically taking some of that profit rather than keeping it in the company and growing the company further to be valued more. They're taking some of that. They're basically saying, we don't need all this cash to continue to grow. We don't have a reason to keep it inside the company to help us grow the company to be larger and worth more. So we're going to pay a distribution out to our shareholders.
Yeah, exactly. If say the total return of a stock or a fund is 10%, and they choose to pay out a 4% dividend, your 10% return would still be 10%. It would just be in the form of a 4% dividend and then a 6% capital appreciation.
That's right.
Or you could just have a 10% capital appreciation and zero dividend. If you continue to reinvest your dividend, like versus just take your 10%, you'd actually be in the same position. You've still got a 10% return. If you don't need the payment paid out to you on a monthly basis or quarterly basis via the dividend, then I would argue you're better off not getting that, not opting for that dividend and just trying to get the total return. because as an investor, what really matters to you is total return, not dividend return, not versus capital return.
I know our audience is primarily made up of 30 and 40-year-olds primarily. Tell us why most 30 and 40-year-olds that are in the accumulation, wealth building stage of their career, why do they likely do not want their return coming in the form of a dividend versus just long-term like capital appreciation and growth?
Let's talk about, it's hard to get in this without talking about taxation. So let's talk about taxation.
Yeah, it's a big part of it, for sure.
It's a big part of it, right? So let's assume that we're not talking about registered accounts like RRSPs or TFSAs, okay? Because those are tax deferred accounts. You're not going to have taxation based on your annual kind of returns within those accounts. So let's make the assumption here that we're talking about taxable or non-registered investment accounts. If you own a share or a fund in your non-registered account that returns you 10% per year, you've had a capital growth of 10%, you have no tax consequences until there is a taxable event, such as selling that share. In contrast, with a dividend, if you had a company that still earned 10% return, but 6 of it was capital appreciation, 4% of it was paid out as a dividend, each and every time that company pays out that 4% dividend, it's a taxable event to you, the investor. And so you have no control over that. You're forced to pay tax at that dividend tax rate, whether you're reinvesting the profits or not. You still have to pay tax on it because it was paid out to you. And so why do we want additional income coming into additional income coming into us that we don't need during our accumulation years? We would rather defer the tax on and the income on that accumulation, on those returns, so that we can keep accumulating and growing our wealth until a point when we actually want to start taking money and realizing capital events, like triggering taxable events at our own discretion, not when the company dictates the dividend has to be paid. So I think that the focus for younger people in the accumulation phase is like what really matters is total return. Letting your money compound without the tax drag is what's important, and create a strategy and a plan for tax efficiently withdrawing that money in future years when the time comes. Look, dividend investing can be good, but it's not the optimal strategy, especially for people in accumulation phase. But there are certainly those like behavioral elements that are super strong reasons that people might consider investing in dividend paying companies or funds that really, they can't be discounted fully, but if you just look at it logically, it really makes sense that like, why am I'm getting the same, the total return is what really matters. Does it, do I need to get paid out the dividend annually? Probably not.
All right, we will shift gears into our third topic, which is referred to as FIRE. FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. I don't think you and I have ever actually really had a conversation in depth about like our own personal take on FIRE, so this should be interesting. What has been your experience or understanding of FIRE? Have you consumed have you done your own research on terms of like consume FIRE kind of mythologies and like why you should consider it? And it's a bit of it's kind of culty.
Yeah.
Right? They're pretty strong in their beliefs of why everyone should consider the FIRE movement.
Mm-hmm.
What's been your experience?
Yeah, it's funny. I earlier this year, I was reviewing a bunch of Facebook groups that I'm a part of, and I removed myself from all the FIRE groups I was a part of.
Okay, so you dipped your toe in at some point.
Yeah, I dipped my toe in. I mean, just an observer really of like what's happening in these groups and what are people talking about. From my perspective, the most important part of this is financial independence. It's having the options, being in control, being able, having choice, freedom. That's really what matters. Where I think FIRE goes wrong from a high level is these people are sacrificing or encouraged to sacrifice absolutely everything in their current life so that they can achieve a future life of freedom and early retirement. And I just disagree with that approach. I think you should be living an optimizing and living an amazing life now and later. I think it's possible to do both. And I don't think anybody should sacrifice the way they're living for 10 or 20 years in order to get freedom for 10 or 20 years. That's kind of my high level.
Yeah. To back up for a moment, to explain like what FIRE really is for those that aren't familiar with that concept. Essentially the community says like, why wait to retire at 60 or 65? Why not become financially independent by really as early as possible? That could be 30, that could be 40 years old. And the path to get there is essentially extreme frugality. Cut your expenses, cut. And the goal is then to save and invest anywhere from 40, 50, upwards to 70% of your income to grow a portfolio to ideally reach about 25 times worth what you need to be spending.
Your annual spend. Yeah, 25 times your annual spend. And then withdraw 4% a year, which is this, believed safe withdrawal rate, where you can withdraw 4% a year and never eat into your portfolio value or run out of money. And therefore you can live the life you want, do exactly what you want to do, and have that early retirement and financial independence.
Yeah. So you're thinking like, it obviously depends on what your spending is, but like to put that in context, like say you're spending a net amount of $50,000 per year, which is common for some of these FIRE folks to like spend they don't spend $10,000 a month on their living expenses. Like it's usually pretty small and tight. So, $50,000, 25 times that, you're looking at 1.25 million that you need to accumulate over a short period of time. One thing I've felt too with the FIRE community, hasn't been around for that long. It's kind of picked up a lot of steam in the last 10, maybe 15 years or so. And over that period of time, we've had a pretty nice run in the market, all things taken in consideration. Like this really picked up after the 2008 financial crisis. Like aside from a few minor dips in the market, like it's been pretty positive in the market. So people have that kind of false idea that it's like, you just put your money in the market, you're going to make great returns, you're 10% on average, and you're going to get to that 25x point fairly quickly. And you can just sit back and chill on your 4%, like kind of safe income withdrawal from your portfolio.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like fundamentally, like I said, like the independent side of it is great. Like, absolutely. I think everybody should be in a position where they feel confident in their finances and have the confidence to make the decisions, to live the life they want to live and do what they want to do every day. I think the people that this FIRE movement really resonates with is the people that just hate getting up in the morning and they hate their job and they want a different life, but they think that their path to a different life is to retire.
Right.
When maybe there's an alternative of doing something that's more meaningful.
It comes down to first, ideally find some sort of purpose in life. Purpose being not just your career, but family and kids and hobbies and all these things that all brings us happiness and joy. We both say that we love what we do. Like I'm not trying to retire by 45 so I can stop doing what we do and what we love doing. I could imagine there's a lot of FIRE folks out there who work tirelessly at a job that they hate and save and invest and grow this amount so that they can retire. I can only imagine there's a good portion of it that get to that end point of saying, oh, I'm retired, now I'm 40. What are you going to do for the next 60 years? Are you truly going to be happy? Like, how do you fill your time now that you're not at your job that you probably didn't like, being as frugal as possible?
At the end of the day, like you're saying, if your goal is to retire at 40, or whatever age it is, like, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And sure, there are cases of people that do find meaning and purpose and engagement and accomplishment in a semi-retirement state. But to me, I just think there's a better way to present this idea. And it's like, how can we create financial independence and confidence so that you can improve your decision-making and live a life that you love? Kind of goes back to our intro. It's like, how can we live a life that we enjoy? All right. Next, we will talk about the fourth topic here, permanent insurance. And not only permanent insurance as like a need for insurance, but as an investment, or what's sometimes referred to as this infinite banking concept. Maybe
So
it's be your own banker, whatever, right? Like
yeah.
there's so many different ways that this is communicated. Tell us tell us about the concept, Scott, and kind of how it's pitched.
So when we say permanent insurance, first of all, we're talking about permanent life insurance. There's essentially, to break this down, there's really two forms of purchasing life insurance. There's your typical, very simple term life insurance, which we won't get into the details of what term, like it's basically a set term length, 10, 20 years. You pay a minimal cost for that coverage amount for that set period of time. Versus there's also this option referred to as permanent life insurance. And that component can have options within a permanent life policy where you can build up cash values. And that's where it's often pitched by various different advisors and folks in the industry as these kind of sexy kind of ways to think about buying permanent life insurance as an investment or as a vehicle to be your own banker and like, don't use the bank, just grow your cash value in your own policy and you can borrow against that. They often will use terms like it's going to be way more tax advantage to build cash in your life insurance policy. I often I see it being pitched a lot. Like chiropractors, I'm sure get pitched this consistently. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%.
Like they're targeted for sure, just like they would be for dentists and doctors. Like anyone that's like a lot of those professionals that are making good income, they're targeted to say, I got a solution for you.
Yeah. 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 I have a magic wand, and with this magic wand, I will help you to grow your investments tax free, and you can be your own bank. You can borrow from yourself. It's way better than leaving money in the banks and don't trust the banks. And, we can lock in insurability and your kids will thank you. Like this is going to change your life. It's going to change your estate, wealth. And like, it's amazing. Best thing
Mm-hmm.
since sliced bread.
Mm-hmm. For sure. The way I often view it is like, say I were just to meet you on the street, Chris, and I hand you a prescription and I say, Chris, just go fill this prescription. With it, you're going to have all these tax advantages and you can be your own banker and you can do this, that, and the other thing. And just, you should go fill the prescription. Like, would you fill it? Like people fill that prescription. But where I'm getting at is that these products are so oversold, but there's no diagnosis before prescribing what that solution how it could fit into your life based on your unique situation. So often we see it just being like, hey, you're a professional, you make money, you can fog a mirror. I got a solution for you. Do you want to hear about it? Right. And then you go, and then they dive into the sales pitch.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great point. It's like, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? Like in most cases, it's an insurance agent trying to sell a product to get a commission. That's the primary goal of these types of policies. The outcome for the client is secondary to that in a lot of cases.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, but it just ties back into like if you look back, like if you can sniff out like where the conflicts of interest here in that particular engagement. Most of the time, these individuals that are selling these types of policies to chiropractors and professionals for that matter, their sole business is to sell permanent life insurance. They're not planners. They're not advisors. They don't do investment management. They don't look at the full big picture or do tax planning. Their sole purpose of their job is to find people and sell them permanent life insurance, and in turn earn very, very handsome commissions for selling those products. So of course that comes with a pretty well thought out playbook and sales presentation on how they can convince someone to say, I've got something for you. If it works for this person, it'll work for you too.
Like you're saying, it's oversold. Like kind of the bottom line, like you can get into the details more if you want to. I'll let you. You're more of an expert on this stuff. But like to me, it's like it's not a scam. Like it's not. There's nothing scammy about it. It's just inappropriate how oversold it is. Like, it's not a legitimate, reasonable option for 95% of people. For 5%, okay, there might be a reason, an insurance need, an estate, or like planning need that this can address. But 95% of the population, it's just not relevant for. But still, it's sold to a lot more than 5%. Right?
Yep.
That's the main thing that like gets us fired up about this.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Chris. It's not, I don't think it's a scam either. I think that there's a time and place for certain products to be applied to a client's life. I think where I immediately have a red flag if someone is selling a product like this without doing what we would refer to as like a diagnosis, like doing the planning work and understanding everything that's going on in that client's life, financially, goals, objectives, the whole 9 yards, before saying this would be appropriate for you based on X, Y, and Z. My whole thought process around this concept of permanent life insurance as an investment, when it really boils down to it, for 95% of people, insurance should be for insurance. Investments are investments. Combining those two is unlikely to be an optimal strategy for you in most cases. Anything you want to add on to there at the end there?
I'm good if you're good.
I think I'm good too. Do you want to touch on this last one?
Not really.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, you'll have to carry on since I ended it there, and we can wrap it.
All right, where do we? Is there anything you want to conclude with? Calls to action, thoughts to share?
I think it just comes down to this last point here. You can touch on that right now.
Which one you have?
As a closeout, like personal finance is personal when it comes down to it. Like,
yeah, perfect.
Let's end it there.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good. All right, that's enough of permanent insurance. Well, we can get into that in more detail another day. But I think as we wrap up here, like all of these topics, as controversial as they can be, there's, like we're saying, there was nothing inherently wrong with any of these ideas. There's nothing like scammy or like that's seriously offside with these things. It's just, when it comes down to it, personal finance is personal. And these ideas like renting versus buying, it's personal. We want you to make the best decision for you. And that's the priority. It's not winning the debate. It's helping people make informed decisions that work for them. So hopefully this conversation made you maybe look at things a different way or think of it from a different angle and ultimately make a better decision.
For sure. The thing that I'll add to that is that I think with all these different controversies out there, a lot of it comes back to our own biases in so many ways that form how we view money and these certain topics. Am I an owner versus renter? Am I a dividend investor versus a growth investor? Am I someone who full-heartedly believes that permanent life insurance and being an infinite banker is the way to go? At some point of your journey, you form these biases, recency biases, confirmation biases, and in so many ways, it may still serve you well. Like you could still potentially have a very good result, whatever path you so choose. But I think it's being open to the idea of understanding both sides, to be open to education and understanding these on both sides of the coin to make a better, more informed financial decision and ideally optimize for moving forward.
Yeah, man, this was fun. Well, let's leave it there. Yeah.
Good. Thanks for joining in. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
All opinions expressed on the Kyra Money Show are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be considered financial, legal, accounting, or tax advice. Always consult your own team of licensed professionals before making decisions about your finances.